You know, when I was at Urban Green, we used to have a saying, which is that the best day to talk about green building is the day that you can see the buildings from the other side of the street.
We know buildings are the problem for climate change in New York City, representing 70% of our emissions. That means buildings are our solution.
And so to have a healthy, happy, and successful community, we not only need to reach our climate goals, but we need to make our buildings better.
So this year's executive budget included what I would say is a game changer for the state of New York, because it sets the path on a statewide basis to realize zero emission new construction.
We need every tool in the toolbox. Businesses can play a critical role in accelerating the net zero transition and addressing the ecological crises beyond their own value chains.
Still a lot of technology change that needs to happen to figure out what's the right balance there.
We have set the goal of having 70% of our financed emissions within those three funds covered by science-based targets within the next 2 years.
I speak to the majority of our investors every year specifically about our ESG goals because they're wanting to understand and validate the work that we do.
Moving forward to say to all of our asset managers and partners, we are aiming for net zero by 2040. We cannot possibly do that unless we have an aligned partnership with all of our asset and investment managers.
I mean, our city we're lucky enough to live in a city that has adapted and evolved over time and continues to do so. And in this moment particularly, where we still have a housing shortage, where we still have very high housing prices that's out of reach for many living in the city still, I think that's where the demand is coming from. If the demand is lower in office space and the demand still remains high in residential, I think that's the city itself is evolving and trying to balance the two out.
We will continue to push in Albany for what we hope will be a tax incentive to actually make conversions more possible, and also to include an affordable housing component for conversions for which there is none today.
From the good news perspective, the electrical system in that building for a big commercial office building is likely size of sufficient capacity to meet the multifamily needs. 5 to 7 watts a square foot, right? Multifamily is half to 2/3 of that, even if you're talking about electrifying the heating loads.
This is really a policy issue about really recognizing the value of the embodied carbon.
Doing this work where as soon as we're thinking about anything new renovation, upgrades, it all has to be designed for the future climate.
Ways that we can really marry the two of some of our resiliency and sustainability goals in the same suite of investments with just a couple of design tweaks.
What do we want to be resilient to? The climate change hazards are one thing, but there's social change, there's demographic change, there's infrastructural change, which in itself causes vulnerabilities. And then what do we want to happen when the worst happens, and to whom?
What are the risks and vulnerabilities that face our infrastructure systems, whether they be our buildings, be our roads, be our electric grid, be our water treatment systems, any of those sorts of systems, and ask questions of how do we make them more resilient, how do we adapt them.
The trends we discussed today will no doubt shape the future of buildings here in New York City and beyond. The challenges are tough, and the impacts of climate change are coming at us faster and faster. But the solutions are very doable, as we've learned today. And it's exactly that practical approach that will continue to guide the very important work of Urban Green.